What happens when a CEO walks into his own store and gets told, "We don't hire your type"? Zachary Kent had built his reputation on turning failing businesses around. 10 years ago, he bought a struggling fast casual burger chain with 9 locations across Indiana and Ohio. He overhauled the menu, redesigned the interiors, and made sure the food quality matched the price. Things were going smoothly until the complaints started rolling in. Nothing dramatic. Just a few customer emails and a couple of exit interviews from employees at Store 6 in Dayton. Complaints about rude staff, disrespect, high turnover. One review called the place hostile for anyone who doesn't fit their vibe, but didn't elaborate. Zachary had heard worse. Still, something about that line stuck with him. He tried calling the store himself, just to feel it out. The manager, a guy named Brad, didn't know who he was. When Zachary asked about applying for a job, the guy cut the call short. "We're full up," he said. "No thanks, no questions, just click." Zachary decided to go undercover. He had never met Brad or the team at Store 6. Turnover was high, and he'd made a point of hiring a district manager to oversee day-to-day operations. That meant no one would recognize him. He dyed his gray, streaked beard fully dark, wore contact lenses instead of his usual glasses, and picked up some thrift store clothes to look like a guy just trying to get back on his feet. He created a fake identity, Cal, a 39-year-old former warehouse worker, trying to re-enter the job market after a rough patch. The corporate office scheduled an interview for him through the online system, which the store manager had no control over. He drove down to Dayton the next morning. The store looked fine from the outside. Clean windows, decent foot traffic, cheerful music playing inside. But as soon as he stepped through the door, the vibe changed. A young woman at the counter, short, sharp voice, name tag said Tina, looked him up and down. "You here to pick up an order?" she asked. "I'm here for the job interview. Name's Cal." She raised an eyebrow. "Wait here." A few minutes later, Brad came out. Tall, lots of gel in his hair. Looked like he was trying way too hard to seem busy. He glanced at Zachary, at Cal, and frowned. "This ain't gonna work," Brad said flatly. "I'm sorry. We don't hire your type." Zachary froze. "My type?" Brad waved a hand vaguely. "You know, old, rough around the edges. This is a fast-paced place. We got a vibe. You wouldn't fit." Zachary stared at him. "You haven't even looked at my resume." Brad shrugged. "Don't need to. It's not personal. It's just, we gotta look here, man. You'd throw it off." Zachary clenched his jaw. He felt heat rising in his face, but he forced himself to nod. "Got it." He walked out slowly, heart pounding in his chest. Once inside his car, he sat still for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. He'd heard a lot in his years, but never that. Not so directly, not so shameless. After a few deep breaths, he didn't drive off. Instead, he pulled out his phone and called the corporate office. "Hey, it's Zach. I want you to schedule me as a trainee at Store 6 starting tomorrow. Use the Cal ID. Tell no one who I really am." He wasn't done. Not even close. The next morning at 8 a.m., he walked into the kitchen entrance in a uniform that corporate overnight to him. The morning shift lead, a guy named Luis, was already prepping lettuce and tomatoes. "You the new guy?" Luis asked. "Cal?" "Day 1. Luis grinned. "All right, man. Let's get you started." For the next 6 hours, Zachary chopped onions, flipped burgers, and wiped down counters. Luis was patient. Funny, he didn't raise his voice once. Every 10 minutes, he checked in to make sure Cal was okay. Tina, meanwhile, rolled her eyes every time he asked a question. She whispered to another cashier, who laughed behind her hand. Brad only came out of the office twice, once to yell at Luis about drive-through times, and once to flirt with a teenage customer. Zachary noticed something else too. There were only young, conventionally attractive people on the floor. Not one person over 30. No one with visible disabilities. No one who didn't look like they just stepped out of a commercial. By the end of the shift, Zachary was exhausted, but not from the work. From the way he'd been looked at, talked down to, judged. Luis caught him by the sink. "You did good, man," he said. "Don't let Tina get to you. She's tight with Brad. Some of us here just do what it takes to get through the day." Zachary nodded. "How long you been working here?" "Almost 2 years. I like the job. I don't like the way some people are treated, but I try to keep my head down." Zachary met his eyes. "You shouldn't have to." Luis gave him a look, surprised, unsure. Zachary walked out that night knowing exactly what he needed to do. But first, he needed to come back tomorrow. And the day after. He needed to see more, hear more. Then he'd make it right. And they'd never see it coming. By Zachary's 3rd day at Store 6, the patterns were no longer subtle, they were systemic. He arrived early again, the same way he had the past 2 mornings, stepping through the back door before the sun even touched the parking lot. Luis was already inside, sleeves rolled up, slicing pickles with the kind of steady rhythm that came from repetition, not joy. Zachary volunteered for the opening tasks without being asked. He didn't want to be seen standing around, not just to keep his cover intact, but because he was starting to feel something he hadn't in years: responsible. While he filled the sauce bottles, he overheard 2 voices from the walk-in cooler. One belonged to Carla, a new hire who'd started the same day he did. The other was Tina. "I'm just saying," Tina said. Her tone clipped. "Don't get too friendly with the kitchen guys. Brad doesn't like it when the floor staff blends with backline." Zachary stopped mid-squeeze. "I wasn't doing anything," Carla replied. "I was just asking Luis how to clock in properly." "Yeah, well, just focus on keeping your station tidy and looking put together. Nobody wants to see sweat on your forehead during lunch rush." There was a pause, and then the door clicked shut as the 2 walked out. Carla's face was flushed as she passed Zachary. She didn't make eye contact. Luis came out a few minutes later, carrying a crate of onions. He looked at Zachary, then at Carla, then went back to chopping without a word. Something else was becoming clear too. Brad barely worked. He spent most of the day in the tiny office near the drive-through window, door half shut, watching videos on his phone. When he did come out, it was always to criticize someone, never to help. That afternoon, as Zachary was refilling the soda syrup boxes in the storage room, he heard Brad's voice through the thin drywall. "Corporate's sending someone next week," he said. "Some regional audit or whatever, so everyone better button up. No more of that Spanish stuff on the floor either. It looks unprofessional." Zachary froze. Another voice, Tina's, responded. "You want me to tell Luis? Tell him, or write him up? I don't care. If they want to speak a second language, they can do that outside. This is America." Zachary stepped away before they saw him. His jaw clenched so tight it hurt. He didn't know what was worse, the ignorance or the confidence with which it was delivered. At closing, as they emptied the fryers, Zachary turned to Luis. "Do you always do the close and the open?" Luis hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. Brad says we don't have enough coverage for me to take split shifts." Zachary glanced around. The rest of the team had already clocked out, most without saying goodbye. "That's 2 doubles in a row. I've done 5. Zachary didn't respond. He scrubbed harder at the fryer tray, his hands shaking slightly from more than just fatigue. The next day, he watched as an older man entered the store around noon. Thick glasses, oversized winter coat, walked with a slight limp. He approached the counter carefully, pulling out a small wallet. "I'm here for the interview," he said. "I got a call from someone. Said I could come in today." Tina looked him over, then turned around without a word and walked to the back. A minute later, Brad emerged. The man introduced himself again, quietly. Brad didn't shake his hand. "We're not doing interviews today. You must have been scheduled by mistake." "But I came from the bus," the man said gently. "It's my second transfer. We're not hiring right now. Sorry." Brad didn't wait for a response. He turned and left. Tina didn't even look up from her phone. Zachary stepped out from the kitchen and approached the man. "Sir," he said softly, "you need help getting a ride back?" The man looked at him, surprised. "No, thank you. I'll wait for the next bus." Zachary walked with him to the door. "I'm sorry that happened." The man just nodded, then walked off, his limp more pronounced than before. After the shift, Zachary sat in his car for a long time, replaying the moment in his mind. Then he sent a message to the corporate HR director with a single line. "Start pulling employment records from Store 6. I want to see the hiring history for the last 12 months. The next morning it rained. The lobby smelled of wet tile and fryer grease. Carla was back on register, her hair pulled into a tight bun. Tina sat at a table during peak lunch rush, scrolling through her phone while Carla scrambled to handle both dine-in and drive-through orders. Zachary saw it all, quietly taking out trash and wiping tables. Luis was in the kitchen, visibly worn, his movements slower than usual. At one point, he leaned against the prep table for a second too long. "You okay?" Zachary asked. Luis nodded, but didn't speak. By late afternoon, Brad finally stepped into the kitchen. "We're out of onion buns again," he barked. Zachary looked up. "The order was short yesterday." "I told you. Then go to Store 3 and get more. That's 45 minutes round trip. Who's covering?" "I don't care." Zachary didn't move. Brad stepped closer. "Did I stutter?" Luis intervened. "I'll go." Zachary watched as Luis took off his gloves, grabbed his keys, and left without even clocking out. Brad disappeared back into the office. When Luis returned over an hour later, soaked and shivering, Zachary had had enough. He walked back to the office and knocked once before opening the door. Brad glanced up, irritated. "You need something?" Zachary stepped inside and closed the door. "I know you don't recognize me," he said, pulling out his wallet, "but I'm the owner of this company. Name's Zachary Kent." Brad blinked. "You've told 2 people this week they weren't fit to work here based on how they looked. You use your position to bully employees and reward people who enable you. You discriminate against non-English speakers in violation of company policy, and you delegate your responsibilities to people barely getting by." Brad's face went pale. "Look, you're done. You're done. Effective immediately." Zachary opened the door and called for Tina. When she entered, he pointed to a chair. "Sit." She looked confused. "I've been here all week. I've heard everything. The way you treat new hires. The comments. The laziness. You're not fit to represent this brand." She opened her mouth to protest. Zachary raised a hand. "Don't. You were given chances. You made your choices. You're dismissed." She stood slowly, stunned. The second they left, Zachary called HR and had them start the termination process. That evening, the store felt different. Luis approached him near closing. "What happened?" Zachary looked him in the eye. "Things are going to change." Luis didn't say anything for a moment. Then he gave a short nod and returned to the grill. Zachary stayed behind after the doors were locked, sitting in the empty dining area under the flickering overhead lights. He pulled out a notebook and began listing names people who deserved raises, people who needed support, and positions that needed to be filled with integrity. The cleanup had only just begun, but the silence in that store finally felt like the right kind. Zachary arrived at Store 6 the next morning under a different pretense. His cover as Cal was officially dropped, but he didn't come suited and flanked by a corporate entourage. Just a clean polo and a clipboard. This time he wasn't there to observe. He was there to rebuild. He met Luis in the back hallway near the freezer, where the usual hum of the compressor filled the silence between them. "I meant what I said," Zachary told him. "But I know talk doesn't change anything." Luis nodded once, cautiously. "What now?" "We start by figuring out what's broken beyond what I already saw." Luis hesitated. "You're not putting someone else in charge today?" Zachary shook his head. "Not yet. I want to see how this team works without the pressure of certain people watching over them." Carla arrived a few minutes later, her expression wary when she spotted Zachary sitting near the prep station. He stood up. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I should have stepped in sooner." She looked at him, unsure. "You're the owner?" "Yes." She glanced toward the front. "Where's Tina?" "Gone." Carla didn't say anything, but the tightness in her shoulders eased. By mid-morning, Zachary had gathered the remaining staff, just 6 people total, including 2 high schoolers from the dinner shift. They met in the back dining area, still closed to customers for cleaning. "No one's in trouble," he began. "But I need to hear from you directly. What's been happening here? And what do you need to do your job properly?" First, no one spoke. Then a cashier named Jamal spoke up. "We never know the schedule until the night before the week starts." Another added, "And if you ask for a day off, Brad would make sure you got the worst shift the week after." A third, a soft-spoken teen named Elise, looked down at her hands. "He said I talked too slow and told me to let customers with better energy take the register." Zachary kept his face neutral, but his thoughts spun. He jotted down every complaint, every detail, without interrupting. When they were finished, he looked up. "No one here will be punished for speaking today. And starting now, the schedule will be posted every Friday by noon, 2 weeks at a time. You'll have breaks when the law says you should, and if someone pressures or punishes you for speaking up, they'll be gone." Immediately, Jamal leaned forward. "Are you serious? I'm not here to hand out promises. I'm here to fix it. But I'll need your help." Zachary spent the rest of the day doing what Brad never had working. He ran orders to tables. He restocked the condiment bar between rushes. When the drive-through printer jammed, he didn't call for someone else. He lifted the lid, cleared the feed, and reset the system himself. By the time the lunch rush ended, the atmosphere felt different. Not cheerful exactly, but steadier, like people were starting to realize they could breathe. That afternoon, Zachary pulled Carla aside. "I saw how you handled that customer earlier. You stayed calm even when they raised their voice." Carla shrugged. "You get used to it." "You shouldn't have to," Zachary said. "How long have you worked in food service?" "Almost 3 years. 2 other places before this." He nodded. "Would you be interested in team lead training?" Her eyes widened. "Seriously? It's not immediate. I'd want to see how you handle different shifts, and you'd need to take the certification modules. But I think you've got the right instincts." Carla nodded slowly. "Yeah, I'd want that." He made a note on the clipboard. Later that evening, after the dinner rush settled, Zachary met with a regional training coordinator in the parking lot. He handed over a sealed envelope. "Emergency audit results," he said. "You'll find falsified records for staff breaks, scheduling violations, and a hiring pattern that excludes anyone outside of a narrow appearance profile." The coordinator flipped through the envelope. "You want this escalated?" "I want it on record. And I want the training for new GMs to include scenario-based modules on inclusive hiring. We're not letting this repeat." The coordinator nodded. "Understood." Zachary waited until the lot was empty before walking back inside. Luis was still there, wiping down the grill. "You should have clocked out an hour ago," Zachary said. Luis didn't look up. "Not much of a team left. I figured I'd help close." "You've done more than help. You've held this place together longer than anyone should have had to. Luis hesitated. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm going to offer you the interim manager role effective immediately. Luis turned around, his expression unreadable. I've already reviewed your file, Zachary said. No write-ups, no attendance issues, and you've trained more new hires than anyone in this district. You've earned it. Luis stared at him. I didn't think someone like me would ever get that kind of offer. Zachary met his gaze. That's the problem I'm here to fix. Luis didn't respond right away. Then he nodded. All right, I'll take it. Zachary gave a single nod and turned to leave. But Luis spoke again. There's one thing I want to ask. Go ahead. If you hadn't come down as Cal, would any of this have changed? Zachary paused. No. I probably would have taken Brad at his word, written it off as a bad culture fit, and moved on. Luis nodded. Then I'm glad you didn't. The next morning, Zachary returned to the store with a stack of printed surveys, anonymous, voluntary, and designed for every employee to share feedback without fear of retaliation. He handed them out personally, explaining exactly who would read them and what they were for. He also brought in a temporary HR liaison from corporate just for this location, just for the next 30 days. Someone employees could talk to in confidence about anything they'd experienced under the previous management. By noon, Carla pulled him aside. There's a girl who came in today asking about open shifts. Said she applied twice but never heard back. Zachary nodded. Can you bring her over? She returned with a woman in her 30s, wearing faded jeans and a polo from another chain restaurant. She looked hesitant, scanning Zachary's face. He offered his hand. I'm Zach. We're looking for people who want to work hard and be treated right. That interests you? She shook his hand. Very much. Let's sit down then. They talked for 10 minutes. She had 5 years of experience, a flexible schedule, and a clear understanding of food safety standards. He offered her a trial shift the next day. As she walked out, Carla leaned close. Brad would have never even let her fill out a form. Zachary didn't respond. He didn't need to. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the last of the dinner crowd faded, Zachary stood in the middle of the lobby and looked around. No one was rushing. No one was snapping orders. The mood was steady, the team moving in sync. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. He walked to the front window and watched the street beyond. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about quarterly reports or brand strategy. He was thinking about the people who showed up every day, gave everything they had, and asked for nothing more than basic respect. And finally, they were getting it. A week had passed since Brad and Tina were terminated, and the impact of their absence hadn't gone unnoticed. The store was quieter in the right ways, no shouting from the back office, no passive-aggressive comments echoing through the kitchen. But the gaps they left behind were real. Scheduling was tight, and everyone was picking up extra hours just to keep things running. The difference was, this time they chose to. Zachary hadn't returned to his office in Indianapolis since that first day he revealed himself. He stayed in Dayton, worked out of a makeshift table in the storage room, and kept his phone on silent. There were reports he was supposed to review, investor calls he'd pushed back, and a board presentation someone else would have to handle this quarter. He'd made a decision. Nothing mattered more than fixing what he'd allowed to fester. That morning, he walked into the store just after opening. Carla was already at the register, buttoning her uniform shirt with one hand while entering the float amount into the till with the other. You're early, she said without looking up. So are you, he replied. You need help with the drawer? I've got it, she said, then paused. But I wouldn't mind shadowing you when you do end-of-day reports. You mentioned team lead training. I want to be ready for the back-end stuff too. Zachary nodded. We'll do it tonight after close. No rush. He stepped into the kitchen and found Luis wiping down the prep area, Not out of necessity, everything was already spotless, but out of habit. Every movement was slow and deliberate, but not exhausted like before. Just focused. Zachary walked over and leaned against the opposite counter. "I spoke with corporate about your new role," he said. "They've approved it as permanent. We'll get your pay adjusted starting next week." Luis didn't respond right away. He kept wiping, then set the towel down. "Appreciate it. I just want to make sure the others get taken care of too." "They will." Carla's stepping into lead training. Jamal's being fast-tracked for shift supervisor. Elise is getting transferred to a store closer to her school. Her mom reached out and said the commute's been rough. Luis nodded once. "Good." Zachary pushed off the counter. "You'll need to start interviewing replacements soon. I want you to pick your own team." Luis raised an eyebrow. "I've never done that before." "I know. That's why I'll walk you through the first 3. After that, it's yours." They didn't need to say more. The trust was already there. By mid-morning, the first applicant of the day showed up. Her name was Nadira, a soft-spoken woman in her 40s with years of experience in catering but no recent job on record. She wore a pressed blouse, her resume folded neatly in a manila folder. Carla greeted her and offered her water while Zachary and Luis reviewed her file in the back. "She's older than most of the crew," Luis said, scanning the page. Zachary looked over his shoulder. "That's not a concern." Luis nodded. "Just saying it out loud. We weren't even seeing applications like this a month ago, because Brad never forwarded them." They stepped out together and brought Nadira into the side booth for the interview. Luis led the conversation, stumbling slightly at first, but gaining confidence as he asked about her previous roles, how she handled stressful lunch rushes, and what she expected from a team. Nadira answered with a calm steadiness, describing how she used to manage catering orders for events of over 100 people, how she trained entry-level cooks by pairing them with experienced prep workers, and how she always kept a spare apron in her bag, just in case someone needed a fresh one and didn't want to ask. Luis nodded slowly. "You ever work drive-through?" "No," she said, "but I learn fast. I'm not proud. I'll take mop duty if that's what's needed." "That's not mop duty," Zachary said. "That's team duty." They offered her a trial shift for the weekend. She looked at both of them for a moment, then quietly asked, "Is this store different now?" Luis answered before Zachary could. "It will be." After the interview, Zachary stepped outside for a call with the company's internal audit committee. He'd requested a full review of regional hiring patterns and wanted to personally oversee the new compliance training rollout. They gave him the green light to start piloting the new modules at Store 6. He hung up just as a delivery truck pulled in. The driver, a man Zachary hadn't seen before, climbed out and walked around to the loading dock. Luis met him there. Zachary watched from the sidewalk as Luis carefully inspected the boxes, something Brad never used to do, and signed the manifest only after confirming every item. Back inside, a new customer approached the counter. She was young, no more than 16, wearing a school ID lanyard and holding a printed application. Carla stepped out from behind the register and took her to a booth. Zachary watched from the side as Carla explained the scheduling process, what the first few weeks would look like, and what kind of support she could expect. All of it calm, clear, and free of any pretense. When the girl left, Carla walked over to Zachary. "She's nervous. Never worked before." "Were you nervous when you started?" Carla laughed. "Still am some days. You didn't show it today." That night, after the store closed and the team finished wiping down the last surfaces, Zachary gathered everyone in the dining area. "I know this past week has been a lot, and I know we're still short-handed, but I want to be clear what happened here before. That's on me. I let this store run without oversight for too long. I trusted the wrong people." He looked around. No one interrupted. No one looked away. That's not going to happen again. You've all earned more than just a paycheck. You've earned a say. Starting next month, we're launching a new feedback system. Every store will elect one team rep to meet monthly with district leaders. No supervisors, no managers, just crew members. You'll decide who. And the reports will come straight to my desk. Jamal raised a hand. You reading all of them yourself? Every single one. Elise, quiet in the corner, asked, even stores you don't visit? Especially those. They stayed for another hour, talking through ideas. Better onboarding videos, a system to swap shifts without manager approval, even a birthday board in the break room. Nothing revolutionary, just human. As the team clocked out one by one, Carla lingered behind, wiping down the front counter even though it was already clean. Zachary stepped beside her. You don't have to stay late. I know, she said. I've never worked somewhere that felt like it could be something better. I don't want to lose that. You won't. She nodded, then walked out into the cool night. Zachary stayed behind for a few minutes longer. He turned off the lobby lights, locked the front door, and stood there in the dark, watching the streetlights cast long shadows across the sidewalk. He hadn't fixed the entire company. Not yet, but he'd started. And Store 6, the place that once turned people away for how they looked, for their age, for the language they spoke, was now the model for what every store needed to become. He'd come looking for the truth. What he found was a responsibility far heavier than he'd expected. And this time he wouldn't walk away from it.